Welcome to The Right Tack, where we help private practice owners face the headwinds of the healthcare industry. I'm Paul Jonas, CEO and co-founder of Breezy Billing and Phoenix Credentialing.
Well, and I'm Jim Jonas, therapist, co-founder of Breezy Billing, Phoenix Credentialing, and the Jonas Center.
Today, we are joined by Sarah Leitschuh, a licensed marriage and family therapist and owner of Sarah Leitschuh Counseling in Eagan, Minnesota. For the past 12 years, Sarah has run a solo private practice. She specializes in perinatal mental health and supporting anxious and overwhelmed parents. And she's here to talk with us about how therapists can create structure and flexibility in private practice in order to avoid burnout and build a sustainable career.
We'll explore what structured flexibility looks like day to day, how systems and routines can actually free you up instead of boxing you in, and what it takes to stay grounded as both a therapist and a business owner.
So Sarah, welcome to The Right Tack.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's a nice break in the week to sit down with the two of you and talk today.
And we're real excited to have you. This is going to be a great conversation on a topic that I know rings true for a lot of therapists.
Yeah, very timely. So, well, all right, let's dive in.
All right, well, we are back and we are ready to dig into structured flexibility with Sarah. But before we get into it, Sarah, what are you doing this weekend?
Well, at the time that we're recording this, it's coming up to the Super Bowl weekend this weekend. So my family has some people that really enjoy watching the game, and then some of us that just come along for the commercials and the food. So what I'm thinking about and kind of planning for is appetizers for this weekend and hanging out with my family to quote unquote watch the game if we want to, and some of us will just be sitting, eating, hanging out.
Do you have a standard appetizer, like that's your appetizer, or that has to be at the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I don't have a standard Super Bowl appetizer, but one thing that I've been thinking about is there's this recipe with like a caramelized onion cheesy dip that is really delicious that I'm planning for this weekend. But it's not a normal appetizer to make because it's super time consuming. But with the Super Bowl, I think it's worth putting in like an hour to an appetizer.
Yes.
Okay. So where's this party at? I may just want.
We at least have to exchange recipes.
Right. Oh, shoot. Oh, man. Me?
Yeah, what do you got going on?
I got invited to go to the monster truck thing at US Bank Stadium with my son and grandson and a few and other relatives. So I can't wait. I think it's been 40 years since I was at the last one.
I think I remember that. Yeah, the trucks were really big back then.
Oh yeah, they were really big. They're smaller now, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now that we're a little taller.
And then hanging out for the Super Bowl. Yeah.
And that's awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's also what I'm doing this weekend, obviously, because we seem to hang out every single weekend.
Yeah.
But another fun thing we're doing besides that is we're doing an Olympics party with some of our friends, and it's kind of like the families are getting together, and we're going to do some different games and stuff on Saturday. So I'm real excited for that. And then our appetizer is pizza rolls. My wife, that's the one time we make pizza rolls a year is for the Super Bowl.
Okay.
And so quick and simple. So I won't have a recipe to exchange with you, Sarah.
Oh, great. Well,
all right.
Well, all right.
Let's get cracking, huh?
Yeah. So, Sarah, you work with a lot of parents around being overwhelmed. You've also seen it firsthand among therapists in your years here now of practice. What are some of the early signs that a therapist might be heading towards burnout in private practice?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, so many potential indicators of burnout. I start to think about sleep as probably one of the first indicators. If our sleep schedule starts to feel off, right? If we're waking up more, we're having a hard time falling asleep, we're just generally more tired, right? Like I start to be curious about why is that, right? And is it possible that burnout is one of the contributing factors? So that's something that I notice when we start to fall off of the practices and the routines that we know support us and our well-being. For me, that's also an indicator that something's going on that might be contributing to us feeling overwhelmed and maybe we need to make some shifts. For me personally, like the number one indicator that I'm burnt out is when I start to forget things. I'm a very organized person. I like very rarely forget things. So that when that happens, it's like ding ding, something's going on, Sarah. You need to pay attention to what might be making that happen for you
Okay.
right now.
What about getting like short, irritable? Because I'm picking that for me. And
Yes,
critical. I can then get
absolutely.
critical too. I really have to watch that. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and we might find ourselves feeling short and irritable, in our personal lives, but also in our practice, right? Where we might have a harder time having empathy for our
Hmm.
clients.
Hmm.
We might have this sense of like kind of almost minimizing their concerns more than we normally would. Um, so those I definitely think are indicators of burnout, both, like I said, in the personal and the practice
Hmm.
side
Hmm.
of our lives.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, and I know from my personal experience with dealing with that, I know it's often not sustainable. And you've talked about sustainability as being one of the biggest challenges in our field right now. So, why do you think so many private practice owners struggle to maintain that balance?
Yeah. Well, as private practice owners, obviously we're therapists first, and we want to be there, be supportive figures right in someone's lives. And then you kind of bring in the private practice piece, and we're also business owners then too, right?
Hmm.
Like, so we're managing the therapist role and the business owner role, which can be challenging, especially when we're kind of new at it. And right now, especially, there's a lot of demand for therapy services, a lot of need for maybe even extra sessions for some of our existing clients. And it can be really hard for therapists, but especially private practice owners to kind of maintain boundaries, to say no. And I think when we kind of fall into that pattern of saying yes, taking on more and more and more, trying to
Hmm.
be everything for everyone, it's a setup for overwhelm, and it's not sustainable in the
Hmm.
long run.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, so I kind of want to dig into the structured flexibility thing, but before
Yeah.
we do, do you have some of your own experience? Like, can you share like what that was like for you when you first started your private practice, Sarah? And
Mhm.
I mean, I go back a few years thinking about that too. But were there times when you felt overwhelmed, stretched too thin? I mean, fear and anxiety was part of my getting my private
Yeah.
practice going. But yeah, what can you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you guys a little bit about kind of like my story of the transition, because I think it influences like my experience with private practice. So I came from an agency setting, and before I had kids, I worked full time there, and then I cut down to half time after the birth of my first child, and then I left agency altogether after my second child was born. And so I think I opened my private practice about 9 months after that second child was born, and I fell into a trap of trying to do way too much, right? Like I was trying
Mm.
to be the perfect like semi stay-at-home mom and the perfect private practice owner who was starting a really small practice, right? Like I was only operating 1 day a week seeing clients, but the way that I was trying to build my practice, you would think it was like my
Oh,
full-time
that's right.
job, right? Like I was
Hmm.
trying to do all the things that I heard that all the people did to build up their practice, even though that might not have been aligned for me. So that's where I started to get overwhelmed, was trying to do too much at once, trying to do things that weren't actually in alignment with my practice goals, and more like paying attention to what other people felt like was working for them building their practice, which was a totally different practice than I was trying to have
Hmm.
at that time.
Yeah.
So what kind of what'd you do to change that, or how did you respond to that? Like, what boundaries or time management, or what other things did you do once you kind of realized where things were headed with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I really had to do was get really clear about my personal vision for my practice and how I wanted my practice to fit with my life outside of work. And once I was clear on that, every time like an idea would pop up for me, I could kind of run a test and say like, does this fit with what your vision is, Sarah? Like, even if it's perfect for some other person who's building their practice, does it actually fit for you? And that helped me get better at saying no to ideas that I might have myself. If people would invite me to do something, I got better at saying no to the opportunities that weren't in alignment for me at that time. Or sometimes I would say, not right now. Like, I want to continue this conversation, like maybe in the future when I have more capacity or my practice is like bigger. I want to come back to this idea. So I would get better at saying no both to myself and to other people once I was clear about my vision.
Okay.
The other thing I had to do was get really clear with my boundaries. Sorry.
I was going to go there. Yeah.
Well, and this is a recurring theme on the show, is for whenever we talk to anybody who's talking about building a practice, is to have that vision. And I know just how helpful it was for us at Breezy when we made our ground rules, and like we did a vision, made rules for what Breezy was and how we'd operate, and that did help define the answers to so many questions that came up. But yeah, boundaries.
Well, if I go vision and values, and yes, boundaries, but the culture too. Like what kind of culture do you want to nurture? Within your practice, I think that's really important too. And boundaries. You mentioned boundaries, and I guess that shifts us into this like. I think it will structured flexibility and what you mean by that, because you're so right. Setting boundaries, saying no. And a lot of times it's hard for therapists to do that, but yeah. So if you can, what does structured flexibility mean for you?
Absolutely. To me, structured flexibility means you kind of have a plan, right, of how you are spending your time in a given week, maybe in a given month. But that plan has built-in wiggle room. It has flexibility for things to move around. It knows that things aren't going to be perfect in any given week. So it allows for adjustments without us feeling too stressed, right? And I think early in my private practice, I didn't do a good job of building in that wiggle room, right? Like I was trying to do so much with such a little amount of time that I was really dependent on every client comes when I think they're coming, right? Like I get all my notes done super efficiently. I'm the most focused when I'm working. Like I don't need like a break. I don't have any distractions. And that's just not the reality of life, right? Like, so the structure flexibility allows us to be human. It allows life to happen around us. And we're ready for it without feeling like everything fell apart and now we have to work harder, work more, right? Put in time outside of our work hours in order to have the practice we want or meet our goals.
So,
we got questions.
We're walking. Well, I'm wondering, what might that look like, in a typical day for you, Sarah? That concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of like to think about like my work week where I will build in certain breaks. So maybe it's a lunch break, maybe it's like an admin break. And where the flexibility comes in is if a client really needed that specific time that I blocked off on my schedule for the break, I might still give them that time if I can then move that break somewhere else in the same day or the same week. So it's not that I'm giving away my time, right? But I'm allowing flexibility to move that time around if it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, I'll still have a hard no with clients and say, no, I'm sorry, right? Like I'm already full for the
Books.
week. But if I have the space and the capacity to move it, I will. So that's an example of where I would say structured flexibility comes in.
Hmm.
And I know when people hear the word structure, they think rigidity usually, like got to fit in this box. But you describe it as it being like a little bit more freeing. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about that? I mean, there's your example right there. But what have other therapists said, or other people that you've worked with on this said about it?
hmm Yeah, I think structure can bring us a lot of comfort, right? Like structure lets us know that we have the time, hopefully we have the capacity to do what we need to do to run our practice. And if we don't have any structure at all, I think it's just almost like too open-ended. It's too free. And that can be anxiety provoking sometimes. It can make us overschedule ourselves and not leave the room for the other types of tasks that we need to do outside of seeing our clients. It might kind of end up in a situation where we feel like we need to work outside of the schedule that we set for ourselves. And I do think like a huge perk of private practice is the flexibility that it brings. Like is that we get to allow ourselves to have the schedule that we want, to move things around when it makes sense. But there is such a thing as too much flexibility, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
too much flexibility can lead to us not meeting our practice goals.
Okay, I'm thinking too. It's the structure. I know structure helps me, so that if I know I have an appointment at 9 o'clock, well, I got to get going and get there on time, and
Right.
it actually I'm gonna throw this out to you, Sarah. For me, I think it takes less self-discipline when you have something outside there.
Yeah.
I've got this appointment at 9 o'clock. My
Right.
wife is an artist and she goes to her art studio, but that's on her time. And so I don't know if Lisa schedules it necessarily, but she makes it her time. But it's one of those things where, well, you could stay in the house and have another cup of coffee or something like that. But that kind of structure does help me. I know that. So
Yeah, right. Because it's less to think about, right? Like if you know
yeah,
you need to get there in time for your 9 o'clock client, it's like, okay, I probably got to leave by, let's say, 8, right?
yep.
Versus, oh, I have the whole day open. When should I start work? I don't know. What are the tasks I'm going to do today? I don't know. Then maybe by noon you get started on something and you
Yeah.
lost 3 hours.
Yeah, that can happen. So, oh man. Well, okay. What other routines, or systems or whatever structure keeps your practice running smoothly, so that you've got the freedom that we're talking about here a little bit, but also and you don't feel like chained to the schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say that I think that we all have to figure out our own systems and routines that
Oh,
actually work for us. So I'm going to give you
Mm-hmm.
guys some things that work for me, but I'm not assuming that they're going to work for everyone else, but maybe
Yeah.
it will spark an idea for a therapist in terms of how they could modify for
Okay.
themselves.
Perfect.
So one kind of thing that I do is I have certain tasks that I always do on Monday, and I have certain tasks that I always do on Thursday. So I see clients, my work week is essentially Monday to Thursday, as long as I hold those good boundaries.
Yep.
And so I have
great.
certain tasks that I always do on Monday. I have a post-it note. I'm old school. I have my paper calendar in addition to my electric calendar.
Love
And I
that.
move my old school post-it note every single Monday.
Did you see that?
You
There's
do
my
too.
My goodness.
Yep.
Okay.
It works as
It
long as it's
works.
on hand.
Right. And as long as Mary reminds me when to put it in the book. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Sure. Yep.
So okay, Post-its, paper calendar. Yeah.
Right.
And
And the paper calendar is a perfect example of that's not going to work for everyone, right? But Jim, it works for you. It works for me. Paul, I'm
Yeah.
assuming not for you just by your response. But
A little too much going on. Got to go digital.
Oh man. Oh yeah, you can see. So
So
Anyhow, go ahead.
yeah. So how do you decide which parts of your week are need structure and where you can stay flexible? Just and I'm looking at this
Okay.
from a like every for anybody who doesn't have this, we need that starting point that you just kind of
Hmm.
mentioned basically. So what works for you as a way to build ideas for any other therapist or really anybody else? Like the more you speak, I'm like, man, I'm going to work some of this stuff into my week. I think so this applies to everybody, which is great.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think that, like, when I think about where do we need more structure, I think about what causes me stress, what am I worried I'm gonna forget, or what kind of tends to fall through the cracks. Those are the places where I would look at, like, how can I implement more structure or routines.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing is, like, if there's any area where I notice myself feeling pulled, like, "Ooh, I gotta work more because of this thing," that
Mm,
maybe I'm always forgetting to do during my work week. Then I think about how do I build that into more of a routine practice so
Hmm.
that I can
Hmm.
contain my work in the workday. And I do have an example of that.
All
Um,
right.
where I practice in Minnesota. We have the Minnesota Care Tax. I know not everyone has that tax, but that's a quarterly um, estimated
Yes.
payment that I need to make, right? And then I have to file my Minnesota Care return in addition to the normal income tax returns. But I will, like, make sure that I put that in my, online calendar for whatever reason. Longer term tasks, I use my online
mhm.
calendar versus my paper calendar. So I
Oh,
All
make
right.
sure I
Chalk
yeah.
have that
chalk that for the
calendar.
online.
Okay.
Make sure I have that calendar to remind myself that estimated payment is due. But it is one of those tasks that, like, I like to do it at home. I like to do it when I have access to, like, our personal tax information, income
Hmm.
information
Hmm.
too. So
Hmm.
it would be something that, like, if I don't block off time at the end or the beginning of my workday, I might be like, "Oh, I'll just do that this weekend." No, no, no. I don't wanna do work stuff on the
Yes.
weekend, right?
Yep.
Like,
Right,
so
right.
because I feel that pull and it's like an extra thing that doesn't happen all the time, I have
Yes.
it on my list next week that I have a block where I'm gonna go home early and I'm gonna take care of that task.
Exact. I'm writing down right now, do the provider tax return before the 15th because I,
Yeah.
I, I forgot. Yes. Thank you. Thank
Well,
you,
that might,
sir.
I'm
Okay.
gonna weasel in the electronic calendar for you.
Okay.
Just like
Okay.
Sarah does it, you can do it
I
too.
could weasel it in. Oh gosh. That is, over the years that like the provider tax, what you're talking about is it kind of has gotten into my head when I need to, pay it and all that kind of stuff. So,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
always good to have a reminder.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Hey, besides post-it notes and your paper calendar and those long-term things you put on your electronic calendar, are there other things you use, scheduling systems or like your documentation? It sounds like you do
Mhm.
notes pretty soon after you've seen a person.
Yep.
Check-ins, anything to help reduce that mental load. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of, like, automating, streamlining documentation, some of that other practice stuff, I do use Breezy Notes,
Oh
electronic
yeah.
health records, and I think one of the perks of that system, that I pay for is the appointment reminders, right?
Hmm.
Like, having that be automated, have it like,
Oh.
is so much easier than, like, me manually sending that out or using a supplemental system in addition to
Mhm.
Breezy Notes. So I love that as an automated way to get my clients to consistently attend their appointments. I also find doing notes in an electronic health record system so much faster than if I was doing paper
The
notes, which we
writing.
used to do in the old school
Yep.
way. And I love that Breezy Notes auto populates my old notes because it's a lot easier, and I notice this when I have new clients versus existing clients, right?
Oh
It's so
yeah.
much faster for me to write my notes when I have the previous note there because
Hmm.
I can make minor adjustments versus feeling like I'm starting from scratch. Obviously, there's
Right.
a lot of continued themes from session to session, and it helps me better connect my session notes to the last session note and see that continuity of the work that I'm doing, which I think is, better for clinical documentation standards anyway. So
Yes.
definitely electronic health record systems and utilizing the features that are built into them, I would say, is a
Hmm.
system that helps um, support me, supports my practice, right? Supports this idea of structure.
Oh, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the plug there. We do work hard to try and make it as easy as possible for therapists to support their clients.
So that gets back to the original. Yeah. How do you make documentation as easy as possible?
Yep.
And yeah, 90% of what
No,
was that?
90% of whatever you do should be as simple as possible, I think was the phrase we started Breezy with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the progress note is it. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Well, I want to
Right.
jump back into boundaries a little bit. I know we covered it a little bit earlier, but you've said they're kind of central to therapists' well-being. They're so important in starting, growing, running, operating a practice. Are there any that you've noticed therapists tend to overlook when they're operating their practices?
Yeah, I think in the beginning stages of private practice, it can feel easy to compromise our boundaries, right? Especially when we don't have a full caseload and we're in this growing stage. But unfortunately, what I did, and I've seen a lot of other therapists do, is kind of compromising those boundaries leads to us kind of like automatically doing that going forward. So I really encourage therapists to start from a place of this is the schedule that I want. This is the kind of client population that I feel passionate about working with, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we're saying yes and no to how we schedule, which clients we take into our practice in the way that's aligned with our long-term vision from the get-go, because it's easier to hold boundaries on the front end than to later have to pull back, right? So for example, in my private practice, I really was informed by like how we did things in the agency that I worked at, right? And it was a lot of you have to have a certain number of evening spots and you have to take all clients, right? And I started doing that, right? Like in my private practice too. And I was like, wait, why am I doing it this way, right? Like
Yeah.
if I'm doing private practice because I want to support the family life that I envision, maybe I don't need to see clients in the evening. Maybe I don't need to see kids just because that's what you always did in the past era, right? Like, and so I started to tweak, but it would have been a lot easier to do that on the front end, right? Because then I was developing plans of how am I going to gradually reduce my evening slots? How am I going to gradually stop seeing kids versus realizing from the front, part of my private practice, I don't actually want to have to be working in the
Right.
evening.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just I can hear the webinar. I can hear the institute already of like, defining your private practice for anyone thinking to start, do these things. That's clearly a lot of therapists do that. And it sounds like also, as with your experience, you need to allow yourself to change or to be different, or you don't have to. And not everybody might have that realization either before they start the practice, or without
Right.
really being mindful of why, what they were doing didn't work and what they want, and defining what they want to do.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Where was I going? Oh, I just want to say yes. It is so much easier to have your boundary set up beforehand and have that real clear definition of that versus trying to, back into that after you've stretched those boundaries a bit too far. That's for sure. And and so part of this too, and I've had discussions with therapists about it, the high intense populations, the high need people,
Yes.
and
Yep.
balancing that in your practice. I think you referred to being able to say no to a referral kind of
Right.
thing.
Yep.
Any other thoughts about that?
Yeah. Jim, what was coming to mind for me is like over the years of being a therapist now for, gosh, almost 20 years, right? I think that I've gotten better about being really clear with clients on the front end about what the level of care is that I offer, right? And setting that up on the front end so that they understand like what I'm providing is outpatient therapy services, right? Like if we're thinking that you need multiple sessions per week, it might not be the right fit for you to be seeing me in my private practice. And saying that from the front end versus starting with someone and then 3 sessions in being like, oh, now I think that I really need to refer you to a different practice that can maybe offer you more like wraparound services like group and whatnot. The other thing when I talk about like being really clear with clients about what I can offer is I always tell clients that my schedule is a Monday through Thursday schedule, right? And if clients need me outside of that schedule, that means that I'm not the right fit for them. So I try to be really clear with them about these are the days that I work. I don't check my emails or my voicemails outside of those days. I take a lot of days off, right? Like I will tell clients like my schedule generally matches the school year schedule. So if you are going to struggle with that, again, you're probably not the right fit client for me, and that's okay. So I'm not apologetic about that. I tell clients from the get-go, I want to get you to the therapist who can support you with where you're at right now. And if that's not me, I'm okay with that. Like, let's get you there. And just being really clear from the front end, I think makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the word transparency too as you're talking. So being clear and transparent with, what your expectations are. Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm traveling a bit more now in my old age and with grandparenting in Chicago and stuff. So anyhow, clients, my clients understand that, and that's because I've been clear with them about the expectations and what I'm doing. And also evenings. I'm not doing evenings anymore. Geez, I get tired in the evenings. So okay.
The older we get, the more tired we seem to be.
Well, speaking of tired, I know how tiring it can be when you've got a lot of work ahead of you. If you've created a backlog or something for yourself, with and it happens to all of us. Like I'm gonna get to this, and suddenly it's 2 weeks later or something like that, and maybe there's other things going on in your life. But for practice owners, if they're getting behind, or if they feel themselves falling behind, or realize, holy cow, I'm behind. How do you recommend, or what do you recommend for them? Like, how can they catch up? Are there you got any tricks or tools or anything like that to share?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I've had a lot of experience helping therapists catch up with backlog, especially around notes or documentation. Backlog seems to be a common area where people might feel they fall behind. So the first thing that I would say about that is we have to get real with ourselves. We need to take an inventory so that we can like actually know how far behind are we. And people get scared of that, right? Like they don't want to know their X number of notes behind, but if we don't know the real truth about how far behind we are, we can't make a doable plan to get caught up with it. So face the fear, find out the actual data about how far behind you are. And from there, then we can kind of try to break it down into a manageable approach, right? Like, because I'll just throw out a number. I'm not saying this is a realistic number or anything, but let's just go with 100 because 100's a nice even number. If you have 100 notes, it's not realistic to think that you're going to sit down and write 100 notes in a day, right? Like no one is going to be able to do that. And even trying to write your current notes plus your backlog notes, if you had 100 in a week, is probably not feasible. So I suggest that people really think about like how much time can I stay focused on this task? And if it's like, okay, I could do like an extra hour every week, time yourself. How many old notes could you write in an hour's time, and then break it down so that you know if I did 10 notes for 10 weeks plus all my current notes, I would be done catching up. And again, I know no one wants to have like a 10-week plan. This is just like a rough kind of numbers for ease here of figuring out the calculations. But if we break it down it becomes so much more doable than looking at
Mm.
this huge, big number that feels overwhelming.
Right, right.
Oh.
It goes from 100 just down to 10, and 10 is much more doable.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
Well,
And sometimes people will say, well, should I take a weekend day and work on notes? And I'm okay with people doing that like on a short term basis, but that can't be sustainable
Mhm.
for the long run, right? Like, so if you feel so far behind that you decide, I want to take some time this weekend to catch up, okay, as long as you have the plan going forward that helps you manage this task, right? Like, we need
Yep.
to be thinking about, how am I going to avoid backlog in the future also? Otherwise, people get burnt out just constantly trying to catch up on their area of backlog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it happens, well, to the best of us. I'm speaking for myself.
Look at you,
So, that whole getting behind, and, and then you do the notes, and then, oh my gosh, a week or two or a month later, you get paid for those notes. And that's, that's a little reward system in there. But,
Yep.
I'm trying to think if any other thoughts about that. The other thought I had too was, well, yeah, putting your nose to the grindstone to get caught up is one of those old terms that, the rubber to the road and that kind of thing. And ultimately, I so agree with you about, if you have to work a Saturday to get caught up, it's that to get caught up part, and then to manage it from there. I don't know. Any other ideas you've got, Sarah? But it's one of those tasks. None of us really very few of us like to do the documentation part.
Right. Yeah. And so like I would kind of want to get to the bottom of like, why is the documentation hard, right? Like because if we can get to the bottom of that, we can figure out the system to make it more manageable going forward. I mean, as you guys can tell, I still do my notes outside of session, but I have built in time in my schedule where I know I will write those notes, right? And I generally have a hard rule of my notes need to be done by the end of the week, usually within 24 hours. So I will kind of push myself to get done with those notes just because I don't like something hanging over my head at the end of the week. But some people struggle with really holding themselves to dedicated notes time outside of session, right? And then there is that more like probably younger therapists are doing this, right? Like that weren't trained back when I was trained, are doing the concurrent documentation where they're writing their notes in session with clients, right? And then that does take away that barrier of, oh, I have to have time outside of session to write the notes. And that could be an approach, right? Like that someone might want to consider if they find themselves constantly feeling like there's not enough time for the documentation. And it would just be an adjustment, right? Of talking to clients about why you're doing it that way, the clinical benefits of doing it that way for the client. And then you kind of do a transition, and that might be a way to eliminate documentation as an area of backlog for you going forward.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I know I'm one of those people who, if I don't do something immediately, or note it, I guess, but I kind of got to work it in the now, and otherwise, especially if it's something I don't inherently want to do, it'll just keep getting pushed off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, notes is a topic we could talk about for quite a while, I think.
In the next podcast.
Maybe. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And how we all do it. So, I don't know. Is there any other what? Okay. I'm sitting here thinking, it sounds like you have a clear boundary with yourself and some real self-discipline about, okay, getting these notes done by the end of the week is a real goal of mine. I know some therapists don't do that, and then they can slip into the guilt, preoccupation. You've got this hanging over your head. I'm thinking that can lead to some burnout, and then what?
Of course,
I mean, well, and then I think, as you've said, it's like to make a plan to catch up. To make a plan to get those notes done in a timely fashion. And I know as a supervisor, I've talked to people too about, notes. The sooner you do a note, the more credibility it has.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, if you have to go to the board or in court or anything like that. So
Right.
getting
Yeah,
those notes.
absolutely.
Okay, yeah, getting them
Yeah.
done timely
Yeah.
is important.
Right,
Well,
Jim. And what you're talking about is making me think about something that I think is important about everything that we do in our practices is if we can tie what we're doing to a why, it's
Mm.
easier to get ourselves to follow
mhm,
through on doing it. And I think for a lot of people, notes, right? Like they're like, oh, this is just an insurance requirement. There's no point of it, right? Like so they can kind of push it off. But if we can tie it to a why, right? Like we're doing this to for our clients' benefits, right? Like in case they needed to transfer care, it's good to have our documentation there, especially if there was an unexpected like crisis situation where
Mm-hmm.
someone quickly went to a higher level of care. I would want my notes readily available so that I could help facilitate that care. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, it's meeting our standards with our boards, right? Like, so if we can tie documentation to a why, it's a little bit easier to hold ourselves accountable to
Yeah.
follow through. But if we tell ourselves that, oh, this is just for insurance, it doesn't really matter, we're not likely to follow through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
are there any other whys that you think of or communicate with therapists who might not quite grasp that? So we've like, there's the board, there's, the insurance review, there's continuation of care if they switch providers. Any other whys that you can give our listeners?
Yeah, I think for us as therapists, right, like the board is kind of alluding to this, but it is a protection for ourselves
Mhm,
to have documented, like Jim said, in a timely fashion. It's showing that this is what we were doing in our session. I did document it. I didn't, like forget or falsify the documentation in any way. So I always think about like, how is this benefiting me as the clinician? How is this
mhm,
benefiting the client that I did my notes in a timely fashion? This is not actually directly related, but also Jim alluded to this. I might get paid, 4 weeks later, but I won't get paid until I sign and submit my notes, right? Like
Right.
so that is a motivation for me too to keep my billing constantly going out. That's a personal benefit, right? Like
mhm.
so that is a benefit. Like getting those notes done every single week. I know my billing is out there and I'm going to get paid whenever I get paid now from the insurance
Yeah.
company.
And I remember specifically building that into the software when we first ideated Breezy Notes.
Uh-huh.
Was
Mm.
the note needs to be signed in order for it to be submitted, which is not the case
Yep.
in all softwares. And we've
Oh.
heard from different administrators or clinic owners who had a major backlog of notes they were still able to
Yep.
submit, bill,
Yep.
get paid, and there's that risk involved with that, of course, but also just like you did the work, you just got to finish the note and sign it. And
Right.
it's
Yes.
if you're going to
Yeah.
get paid only if you sign it, then there's a little more
Of that
fire under your
accountability to push
backside to
it
do
out
that.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
Well,
And I like that for the client too, right? Because especially at this time of year when deductibles have just started over, like I would rather get my billing out
mm-hmm,
there, get
mm-hmm,
the claims back, collect, the deductible portion of the client's payment versus like 6 months from now, oops, I like didn't submit my claims for a long time and now you owe me thousands of
thousands.
dollars
Yeah.
versus,
yeah,
100.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see all sorts when it comes to that, and no
Yeah.
client ever wants to get that big bill if you get 4 or 6
Nope.
sessions or something all on
Yep.
the same invoice.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
so Sarah, if you had to sum up your approach to running a sustainable practice, all the things we've kind of talked about, if you're to sum that up in a few words, I'm curious, what would those words be?
Ooh, this is so hard to just kind of limit it to just a few words. But I would say build your practice around your needs, your lifestyle, not the other way around, right? And then from there, be really clear about your vision. Make sure you run all of the opportunities that present themselves through that filter of is this in alignment with my vision and my goals,
Mhm.
and therapist well-being being a priority in your practice is a totally valid vision and goal.
Yeah. Oh, That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything like that requires some introspection and some real thought? Do you have any seeds to help providers or would be providers get started on that?
Yeah, get started on kind of clarifying their
Yeah,
vision.
that inward look,
Yeah.
and what are some of those first steps for like I know I don't want to work on Fridays, or I just want Friday to be my admin day. What are the things
Mhm.
about me, if I'm starting to practice, should I be thinking about, so I can more aptly define that?
hmm Absolutely. So I would start with the question of why am I choosing private practice? What
Mm-hmm.
is the flexibility that I'm looking for from private practice, right? Like, what is it that I think private practice is going to offer me that's different than continuing in my current workplace or working in an agency setting? Because I think from there, then you can create the structure, right? Like if you're
Perfect.
leaning into it because it's like I want to choose which clients I want to see. It's like, oh, okay. So let's go down a path of who is my ideal client? Who do I not
Hmm.
want to see? Who do I
Right.
not feel competent seeing? That kind of helps you narrow down there. If it's, okay, I want to be able to do this um, in my kind of schedule, right? Like I want to be able to work this around my family. It's like, okay, so when do I need to show up for my family? When do I want
Hmm.
to show up for work? And then those kind of will help you set the parameters of like the schedule you would want to create.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
makes so much sense. That's fantastic.
So I'm thinking we've been talking some proactive things, to do, and I'm also wondering about the re. Maybe it's not reactive, but what if I find myself as a therapist, or owner, uh, not being really happy, seeing myself burning out? Yeah, how can I get back on track? What advice do you have for that for people like that, Sarah, who are in that
hmm
situation?
Yeah. So the first thing that came to mind to me when you started the question, Jim, was start saying no. So think
Uh,
about where you're feeling drained, where you're feeling like you're just not energized by the work that you're doing, the task that you're doing, and start to think about, do I have to do this? Right? Like sometimes we're doing things like I was doing at the beginning of my practice that I didn't actually really need to do, right? And they could just be flat no's, like, let me take this off my plate and I don't even need to give it to someone else. Some things might be draining us, but they still need to be done, but maybe they don't need to be done by us, right? So perhaps there's
mhm,
the opportunity to outsource a task to someone that you're working with already, like within your practice, or maybe you hire someone to do a task that you find especially draining. Um, the other thing that came to mind to me right away, Jim, was also just seeking feedback from colleagues, right? Like
mm,
maybe that's clinical consultation, maybe it's just talking through your practice and where you're feeling stuck just to get an outside perspective. Because sometimes we get stuck in thinking we have to do things a certain way, and that outside
Hmm.
perspective might help us realize there's subtle changes we could make right now that help us feel less depleted
mm,
and have more energy.
yeah.
Well, I the, everything we've been talking about, it sounds like there's a lot of intentionality in that, like that it's that you need to be very intentional with this. It's not just I'm sick of
Mhm.
agency and I want to go start my own thing, or I
Yep.
want my agency, or I you get, or if you have an agency that you're trying to grow, that you really need to be thinking about those things. So are there any, like, do you do any personal check-ins, or how do you check in with yourself when you know it's time to make changes?
Mhm. Yeah. So I kind of have a very like routined way of checking in with myself that you guys probably can gather just from the nature of this conversation. But I think I told you guys earlier that I have my regular Monday tasks and my regular Thursday tasks,
Mm,
but I
yep.
also have
Yep.
regular first Monday of the month tasks. And one of those things is just reflecting on how my practice was going the last month. Where was I struggling, if anywhere? What are my goals for the upcoming month? And I intentionally every month then set new goals
Okay.
based on that reflection. And it's really helpful to just have that be a regular monthly routine. But I will also, at the end of the year, set goals for my practice for the upcoming year. And quarterly, I kind of am checking in with, am I on track with where I wanted to be going with this practice this year or not? So there's multiple spots throughout the year where I'm intentionally checking in with myself. And
Hmm.
as we've alluded to earlier, I think it's really important to give ourselves permission to make adjustments when needed, but also not to be too quick with making
Mm.
adjustments. Sometimes I'll check in with myself and I'm like, okay, something's not feeling quite right. I just want to watch this for the next
Okay.
month and then
Yeah.
I'll see if I need to make adjustments. So I do give myself permission to make adjustments quickly if that seems like what I need, but I also am cautious to like make sure that I'm not making impulsive decisions that might
Right.
not be good for me or my business just because I had, a rough week or month.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay, so the word that comes to my mind is reflecting, and I think that,
Mhm.
I don't know, it goes hand in hand with intentionality, and I see
Yeah.
myself reflecting quite a bit when I'm thinking about
Mhm.
this. So, I, I, Sarah, are there other things like, for a new practice owner, someone just starting out, are there any other thoughts that you've got about how they can, make their practice sustainable rather than, waiting until the burnout,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think that starting with the framework of therapist well-being is central to your
Ah,
practice
okay.
is really important, right? Like, so making sure that every decision that you're making about how to run your practice is grounded in taking really good care of you just as much as it is in taking really good care of your clients, right? So that comes to everything, right? Like even choosing your electronic health records system, you want to make sure it's easy for you as a therapist to use, right? It's not going to add more stress. It's going to lighten your load, not like give you more to do, but you
Hmm.
also want it to be user friendly for your client. So making sure that every decision you're making, you're thinking about yourself as well as the clients. I think we have a tendency of thinking, well, I have to do this certain way because that's what clients need. And we do, right? Like we do have an obligation to provide good care for our clients, but we also have an obligation to provide really good care for ourselves because if we're not doing
Right.
that, we're not going to show up as
Right.
good therapists, ethical therapists.
Right. Yeah. I think of mentoring and, uh,
Mhm.
self-care as an example, for your therapist, for your clients,
Mhm.
for your family, for your kids, having them
Mhm.
see that in you, I think is really important.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, Sarah,
Yeah.
thanks so much. I guess I've got one last question for you. What's one thing that you hope everyone listening takes away from this conversation?
Yeah. Um, I think that what I hope people are taking away from our conversation is we can have sustainable practices, that being a therapist for the long haul is a sustainable career with intentionality. And that really do think the foundation of that intentionality does have to start with therapist well-being being a priority.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the practical, honest advice that you've given us and our listeners for how to keep their private practice sustainable. I've definitely taken notes on this. I'm going to put some of this stuff I think into practice this week, or at least ready for next week here. Of course, I'll probably lose them in all my organized chaos that I tend to live in, but I'm one of those that kind of flies like that. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Well, yeah. And I want to thank you too. I'm new therapists and new owners. I think this podcast will really resonate with them. And as you and I, already know, we love what we do, and I want to pass that on to others. And I think
Mm.
this has been a good step in that direction. So thanks a bunch.
And
thank you.
before we wrap up, though, we do like to ask, what have you got going on right now? Is there anything you'd like to share or promote, or is there anything just keeping you busy lately?
Yeah, well, always busy with my
Right.
family, right?
Hmm.
But I am accepting new clients at my practice in Egan. I see clients in person and via telehealth, and I also can see telehealth clients in Florida. So if anyone does have, referrals to send this way, especially perinatal clients, overwhelmed parents, I do have some capacity to take on some new clients right now.
All right.
Good
Sounds
to know.
great. Yeah, that's great to know. In Florida too. That's are you doing telehealth the right way, or do you want to be in Florida doing telehealth for the Minnesotans at least in this winter when it's been so cold?
Yeah, maybe that will be a retirement plan, is to be able to be in Florida.
and do it that
Fantastic.
way. Oh, well, great. Well, so make sure you follow us wherever you get podcasts and share this episode with colleagues who are thinking about growing their practice.
And don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletter, Trade Winds. There's more insights on running behavioral health practices in there. I do got to say, I'm also excited because I'm let's see, 8 out of 10 of the 10 acts of kindness that we started back for our 10th birthday.
Great.
Today's was pay it forward in the coffee line. So somebody got a free coffee today, and I think I definitely left enough for a tip, unless I got a really fancy one. So hopefully,
that's great.
Hopefully somebody gets an extra good day with that. We've got 2 more left, and really excited to put those out there. But otherwise, with that said, until next time,
keep your eyes on the horizon.